Hi, Book Buddy friends. It's Mary Beth Martin, 4-H agent for Bedford. And when we left off in Will of the Wood last time, there was some great adventure. The forest was starting to work together with Willa to help Nathaniel, but there was really something looming over that was about to happen between those loggers and them. So let's find out what might have happened as we pick up chapter 54. In my copy, it starts on page 275. Willa watched in relief as the terrified loggers fled in panic, tearing away by foot and by horse. When they were finally gone, she let go of the tree roots and collapsed to the ground in exhaustion. She lay in the dirt, shaking and gasping for breath, just holding on to the steadiness of the earth. The branches of the trees stopped thrashing, the roots retreated slowly back into the ground. The screaming storm of violence that had filled the world just moments before faded into an eerie silence. The badly wounded Nathaniel lay on the ground a few feet away, cradling his dog's limp body in his arms. No, not you, Scout, Nathaniel cried as he hugged his dog to his chest. There was blood and bruises all over Nathaniel's face and head, and she knew that he must be in terrible pain. But he wrapped his arms around his dog and held him. Not you, boy, not you, he wept as he stroked Nathaniel's head. And then Nathaniel looked over at her and met her eyes. We've got to help him, Willa. We've got to help him. But Willa knew it was too late. The logger's gun had done its damage. Scout's spirit was gone. The last living member of Nathaniel's family was dead, taken from him by the forces of the world. I'm sorry, she said as she wrapped her arms around Nathaniel. I can't save him. And Nathaniel wrapped his arms around her in return, holding her like she had never been held, holding her as if she were the very last being on earth he could hold on to. After a long time lying on the ground with Nathaniel and Scout, Willa rose and she pulled Nathaniel slowly up onto his feet. She put her shoulder under his arm and they limped back to the house in silence. As he slumped down, bloody and wounded, into his bed, she tried to say gentle words to him that might soothe him, that might help him through the pain of his loss, but she knew that her words meant nothing. Nathaniel had suffered too much. He'd lost his wife, his children, and now his dog. She wanted to tell him that she'd seen Isca alive, to give him hope, to give him something he could cling to. But she knew she couldn't. Not at this moment, not like this. After all the time that had passed, Isca was probably dead by now. She couldn't hurt Nathaniel with the new uncertainty, this new pain, the agony of knowing that he might have been able to save his son if only he had known where he was. As she thought about what to do, she went out and gathered seal berries and herbs from the forest. When she returned, she applied poultices to his bloody cuts and bruises, trying to help him in any way she could. He lay in the bed without moving, his eyes glazed with hopelessness. She wondered again whether she could tell him about what she had seen in the prison. She knew it wasn't right to hide what she knew from him, but she told him about seeing Isca, the night spirit. Later, he'd drag his bleeding, damaged body onto his feet, grab his rifle, and head up the mountain to find his son. It would be impossible to stop him. He'd go with or without her. But there was no way he could make it up through the ravines and ridges to Dead Hollow, and she couldn't bear the thought of him collapsing in exhaustion and lying dead and alone among the rocks. She couldn't bear the thought of the Jaders getting hold of him the way they had her grandmother. But as she wet a rag and cleaned the dirt and blood from the wound on Nathaniel's head, she was already beginning to see what she must do. She didn't want to do it. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to go back up there to that dark place. She knew she was probably going to die. And if by some thread of strength Isca was still alive and by the grace of the great mountain she managed to get him back to his father, then she knew what would happen next. It would break her heart. From what she'd seen and experienced all her life in the withered lair of the dead hollow, love was a rare and tenuous thing. Families, small and fragile and dying. Love was a thing that shattered. It was a thing that could not last. She had finally found in Nathaniel a place for her heart to live, and it felt like a shaded, magical forest dell, unlike any other. But if she succeeded in returning Isca to him, and maybe even his other children if they were still alive, then she knew everything would change. Nathaniel would have his real family back, his human family, the family he'd been searching for and yearning for, the family he truly loved. His need for her and her strange night spirit ways would fade away like mist from the top of the mountain all around her in one moment, then drifting away in the next, as if the great mountain was saying, "You've had enough now, little one. It's time for you to go." And she knew it was a pain she could not bear. But despite what was going to happen, she knew in her heart that she had to go. Nathaniel lay in his bed, broken and wounded, body and soul, mourning not just his dog Scout, but his beloved wife and children. Willa knew that one way or another, whether she lived or died up on the mountain, whether she succeeded or failed, this would be the last time she would ever see him, the last time she would ever touch his shoulder with her hand and hear his voice. As the man Nathaniel's eyes finally drifted shut and he fell into a troubled sleep, she wanted to say thank you to him. Thank you for all he had done for her, for the kindness he'd shown her that first night in the barn and every day they'd been together since. And she wanted to say how sorry she was about everything that had happened, what had come before and what had come after. But as she turned and went downstairs, she couldn't find a way to say any of these words or express any of these feelings in the new language or the old. And although he had taught her some of the English letters, she did not yet know how to write the sounds of feelings on the skins of trees. As she walked outside alone, made her way across the grass, and disappeared into the forest, it was just the way she had came. Willa followed the edge of the river like she had many times before, but traveling upstream now against the flow of fate, against the flow of time, back towards the world she came from. She made her way high up into the mountains through the darkening forest as the mist rose up into the moonlit trees, and the owls took wing. Hours later, she finally came to the rocky gorge that led into Dead Hollow. The Watcher, the weathered carcass of the upside-down tree, wedged between the narrow walls of the ravine, loomed over the path, a black guardian against the enemies of the clan. And tonight, that's me, she thought. She had told herself that she'd never come back to this dark and wretched place, but here she was again. She wanted to turn away, to sulk back down the mountain and slip quietly into her soft cocoon hanging in Nathaniel's room. She wanted to go back to Scout and pet his ears and run and play with him in the soaring groves of trees, but she knew she couldn't. Her life with Nathaniel and Scout had been destroyed by forged symbols on a piece of wood and a logger's gun. She had no choice now. She knew what she must do. But she felt the weight of it in the pit of her stomach as she watched bands of jaders and guards moving in and out of the entrance of the Dead Hollow lair like hornets around a nest. It struck her how the members of the clan always ventured out of the lair in groups. There is no I, only we. But when she had been a thieving jader, she liked to go out on her own, to use her own skills and make her own decisions. She hadn't even realized at the time how much she had set herself apart from the others, how infuriating and incomprehensible it had been to Gretick, and how suspicious it had seemed to the Pateran. Now there is an I, she thought. I, the wood witch, the weaver, the jader, the thief. Move without a sound, steal without a trace. That's what I'm going to do. Steal without a trace, just like old times. But as she gazed at the Watcher, she knew if she walked in through the front entrance of the lair, they'd swarm her and kill her on sight. And she suspected that the prison guards had probably found the crack in the stone she had used the last time. They were probably guarding it or had it blocked off. It was no use to her now. This time she needed a different way in, something small, something quiet and something that would reserve her strength for the battles to come. One of the things she learned as a jader was that the nights of thieving were long and filled with many perils. She pulled back into the forest and headed for a nearby stream to find some help. A short time later, she crept through the dripping understory of the blackened trees that grew along the back walls of the lair. The shuffling, tail-dragging movements of her new allies followed just behind her. When she finally came to the spot that she had thought was nearest to the prison, she whispered, "Here," in the old language, touching her fingers to the base of the wall. The two beavers moved forward and started chewing, chomp after chomp with their sharp, strong teeth, cutting their way through the thick layers of interwoven sticks. 3 of the beaver colony's young kits and 2 of the adults had been trapped and killed by the jaders for the bounty on their fur since she had last visited the colony. It seemed impossible, but the Farron of the Dead Hollow clan, who had once lived in harmony with all the living things, had become their gravest enemy. "Thank you, my friends," she whispered when they finished boring a small hole through the wall, big enough for her to fit through. "It's going to get bad from here on, so you better get back to your lodge and stay safe." As she crawled on her hands and knees through the dark, slimy hole, her stomach tightened. She loathed the smell of it, the closed-in feeling of it, but how could she have stayed with Nathaniel knowing what she knew? How could she abandon Iska and to the night spirit guards if he was still alive? He was Nathaniel's son. She crawled through several feet of densely layered sticks, then finally made it through to the other side. She slowly peeked her head out and looked around. The hole hadn't brought her directly into the prison, but into one of the lower tunnels of the lair. She checked one way and then the other for any signs of guards. For now, her path looked clear. Move without a sound, steal without a trace, she thought, again as she crept carefully out of the hole and crouched down to the floor. She stayed very still, listening for the faintest sounds in the distance, her quills oscillating, ready to detect the slightest movement coming in her direction. Every sense in her body was turned to the take. She dashed up the tunnel quickly and quietly, scanning ahead. She reached one turn and then another, making her way towards the prison. It was hard to imagine that the boy Iska had survived very long in the cruel conditions she had seen him in. The prison guards had seemed determined to make sure he wouldn't last. The small hole they had crammed him into hadn't been much larger than his curled body, and the guards hadn't even been feeding him. It seemed even less likely that his brother and sister had survived. She'd seen no signs of them at all. But she had no choice now. For Nathaniel's sake, one way or another, whether they were alive or dead, she had to figure out what had happened to them, or Nathaniel would drive himself insane searching up and down the river for their bodies. If she could somehow find Iska in the prison and escape with him, it would be the greatest take a Jader had ever achieved, to steal a human being right from under the noses of the Night Spirit clan. She came to a corridor where she could hear the sounds of footsteps and voices just ahead. She stayed close to the wall and moved slowly forward. As she peered around the corner, a guard ran towards her, spear in hand. She threw herself to the wall, wove herself in, and disappeared just as the guard ran past her. Before she could even take a breath, 2 more guards came down the corridor, dragging a screaming human girl behind them. The girl flared her body in wild, jerking motions, lurching one way and then the other, trying to escape the guards. But the guards had clamped onto her wrists with their bony hands and would not let her go. "What's wrong with this one?" the larger of the 2 guards asked as they dragged the girl down the corridor. "It keeps trying to escape," the other guard said. "Lorcan said that it wasn't cooperating, so we should throw it into the abyss." Willa watched in horror as they pulled the screaming girl away. They were taking her towards the labyrinth where they would heave her into the black void of the bottomless pit, and she would never be seen again. Willa's fist tightened and her jaw clenched. A desperate need to help the girl welled up inside her, but she didn't know what to do. She couldn't leap out in front of the guards and suddenly overpower them. She felt so helpless. "Get out. Get what you came for," she told herself fiercely, trying to focus her mind. find your take and go. She moved deeper into the prison, sneaking unseen and unheard from shadow to shadow, blending here and darting there. She soon found herself surrounded by wailing, captured children crammed into prison cells up and down the corridor, guards shouting at them through the lattices in the cell doors. Some of the children were wounded and weak, others strong and defiant and fighting back. But what struck her was that the humans were still here, and at least some of them were still alive. It seemed as if the guards were holding the various prisoners in different types of cells, feeding some extravagantly and starving others, talking to certain children in kind words, but then isolating the others in total darkness. She couldn't figure out why the guards were doing all of this, but somehow it felt strangely familiar to her. There was something about it that reminded her too keenly of her own nightmares. Just get what you came for, she told herself again, and tried to continue on. You're a thief. Find your take and go. Deeper down in the prison, where there were no guards, she followed a long, winding tunnel with dozens of cells no larger than holes for curled up bodies. Little human fingers reached out through the lattices of woven sticks as she went by. She tried to push her way through the dark, nightmarish confusion, but the sound and smells were unbearable. Finally, she came to the cell she was looking for, where she had fed Iska the cookies. She crouched down and peered into the darkness of the hole. The body of a young, dark-haired boy lay crumpled on the floor. "Wake up," Willa whispered into the cell, but the boy did not reply. "Iska, wake up," she whispered louder this time, but the boy in the cell did not move. She looked up the corridor, knowing that a guard could come running in her direction at any moment, and then she turned back to the cell. "Iska, it's me, it's Willa," she said. "You've got to get up, we've got to go." But still the crumpled shape in the cell did not move. She felt her world starting to close in, the heat rising to her face, and it was getting more and more difficult to breathe. Her hands trembled as she reached slowly into the darkness of the cell to touch the body. And with that, we will stop at the end of chapter 56, and next time we'll pick back up in the adventures of Willa of the Wood.